Hello, you are listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your hosts, Thomas and Tammy Ferreira.
Hi, I'm Tammy.
And I'm Thomas.
And today we are going to talk about co-parenting communication specifically. And we're going to kind of come at this from a few different angles because this affects not only the personal stuff, it also affects the court stuff, you know, and so there's a lot of overlap. And we're going to talk about the two different perspectives of how we typically see moms come at the communication versus how we typically see dads come at the communication. And a lot of people are using parenting apps such as Our Family Wizard, Talking Parents. I think there's one called Close or something like that. There's a multitude. It used to be
I've never heard of that one.
Yeah, it used to be Our Family Wizard was kind of the co-parenting app, and now there's all these takeoffs from it.
Yes.
But some people, I do also talk to people that do use email or just use text messages, which actually are my least favorite way because I think they're the most fraught with potential hazards. But
Why is that?
Because I think they're easy to react quickly and emotionally.
Yeah, I think people do use them to communicate a lot of emotion.
Yeah, because what happens is you get a message from your ex, and no matter what format it comes in, a lot of times after you read it, you feel this, I like to call it this rush, only it's not a positive rush, it's a negative rush.
It's like that mother bleep.
Yeah, a negative rush of blood to your head and face and all that, where you're just like, where you're irritated. And so, I think fear comes up for a lot of people, anxiety, you're stressed about how to answer it.
Or the need to not let them have that on the record.
Right.
It's like, oh, if I don't rebut this, then I agree to it.
That's right. That's right. There's a lot of documentation stuff. And, we've talked about some of these before in specific contexts, but I want to dedicate a full episode to this issue because honestly, you guys, this is the core issue. This is a lot of what Thomas and I coach on. And I know that people think, oh, communication, how's that have anything to do with my case? It has everything to do with your case. The communication is where your life side and your legal side meet.
That's
and they
true.
Overlap.
That's true.
And so when you behave poorly or how the court doesn't want you to, when you're communicating in ways the court doesn't want you to, what happens is that ends up becoming the thing that hurts you in your court case. And so we're gonna talk about that. I'm gonna ask Thomas to chime in a little bit on that. So So when somebody comes in and let's say they've got a big stack of communication from the other parent, what, as an attorney, when you're going through that, what are you looking for? What are when you sit down, because I've seen you sit down with a marker with like 1,000 pages of, because they become Exhibit A, right? Like they're frequently one of the top exhibits. And one of the things I want you to talk about is like, why are we so frequently using those exhibits for submission in court? And then what are you looking for in them?
Right. Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, the court is looking for whether these two cooperate. And there's a huge emphasis on that because when you're trying a child custody case, a huge factor is the willingness of one parent to support the other. So the ideal communication record for a client is kind of a willingness to be a problem solver and to solve problems, to be responsive to the other person's concerns without being too technical or verbose. But that's one thing. Another thing I'm looking for is which parent is is this about the children really, or is this about the parents themselves? It's about their relationship. And that's a subtext. You have to be very careful making that argument, but played the right way, if you excerpt the right communications, it starts to look like one parent or the other parent or both parents don't really care about the children as much as they care about the other person, or they care about fairness. Fairness is a big one, especially with guys. Or, it's got to be fair. It's got to be equal.
And so I guess, so one of the things I want you to speak to is kind of like, a lot of times when we're going through and we're coaching people on communication and we're telling them kind of ignore the other person. Don't worry about what they're saying. Just communicate the facts. Don't worry about all these other things. If the other person's being nasty isn't really going to change their parenting time, because what we always tell people is the court doesn't use these things to punish the other parent, right? So if I'm not going to be able to use these to increase my parenting time or decrease their parenting time specifically, what's the benefit of the messages if I'm doing things the way I should be? If it's not going to get me more parenting time, what is it going to get me? I guess is what I'm trying to.
Well, we'll get you more parenting time in some circumstances because it gets you wearing the white hat.
So it's an indirect.
It's subtle and indirect, and it's not something that I don't come out and say, this parent's obviously being unreasonable and doesn't care a lick about the child. All they care about is getting the dig in. No, it's more subtle than that. I want the court. You're dealing here with people that are flesh and blood, and they want to do the right thing, but they react negatively to certain things. And I think that a lot of times courts react negatively to conflict.
Gotcha.
We have cases that are high conflict, and the case becomes about whose fault is the conflict.
Right. So what are the 3 biggest mistakes you see people make in their co-parenting communication?
Well, I think the biggest mistake is to use the co-parenting communication as a forum to vent your feelings. There's no question about it. And in an extreme case, you have the parent that just can't resist sending nasty grams.
Right.
And I've had a couple of those cases, and I can think of one that we actually turned around 180 degrees by just getting our client, who is the father in that case, to knock it off.
Right.
Okay. So that's number one. Number 2 is reacting.
Which is the mother's side of the equation usually.
Yeah, sometimes it's the mother. Sometimes it's dad, though. I mean, a lot of times with mom, you get a lot of subtle attacks on his character. So
his fathering.
Why don't you step up to the plate? Is
Right.
something we see frequently.
When are you going to start being a real dad?
Yeah, when are you going to start? Yeah, when are you going to start doing what you say you're going to do? When you're going to have some integrity?
Right.
And those are things that really, push our buttons as guys, because we see ourselves as providers. We see ourselves as problem solvers.
Right.
We see ourselves as rational, calm, right. What is it? Left brain? Which one is it?
Left brain.
The one that the logical
Guys
one.
are usually left. Well, we shouldn't say usually. I mean,
Yeah.
women are left brain too, but guys come at things usually with a more logical perspective.
Right.
Women
Not
tend
as
to
emotional.
take an emotional.
Right. We don't get hysterical. We're
Right.
calm. We're the guy you want in the foxhole, and that really shatters it.
But consequently, sometimes men are overly formal in their communication.
That's true too.
I find that to be a big a big common thing with guys in particular is they'll get super, super formal. And it's like, if you read your message to your ex back to yourself out loud, and it's not things that you would say, like sitting in front of the other person
Right.
and having a normal conversation, you need to change it to more familiar language. And there's a balance there. You don't want to be overly familiar because you're no longer in an intimate relationship with this person, but you have been,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so you don't need to be super, super formal. I think that's one of the things that really, from mom's perspective, really tends to kind of set us off is, oh, I bet you'd really appreciate that. Let me just do that for you, because guys will say things like, I'd really appreciate it if you would,
Yes.
But in normal conversation, we don't usually use that phrase a lot.
Yes. Kindly knock it off.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of there's one phrase that one guy we were working with used all the time. I'm trying to think of what it was. The whole time you were talking, I was trying to think about what it was, and now I can't remember it.
And I'm trying to remember, what did you say the first mistake was that people make?
That they are overtly aggressive, that they send nasty.
Oh, that they attack.
Yeah.
They attack the other person's character. So number 2 you said react emotionally.
Right.
Number 3 would probably be being too formal.
Yeah, being too formal. And number 4 would be being too verbose.
No, but you already said that. Being too reactive. That was number 2.
Yeah, but also being too verbose. In other words, using too many words.
Yes.
I like short communications.
Yes. And and this is something that, I'm not, men and women do both of these activities. I'm not trying to say that there's never one or the other, but just as a general rule, as Thomas and I work with mom and dads, I think moms are more often guilty of too many words than dad is most of the time.
That's just so binary.
I know, but there's certain things that just, you work with hundreds and hundreds of people, and you start to see patterns in how we communicate as moms and dads. And so, so I do think moms tend to use too many words. They explain too much. They give their thought process. They justify. Like if dad says, well, you shouldn't have done this, instead of just ignoring it and saying, well, that's his opinion, they'll say, well, I did this because I thought blah, 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 blah. We stay in that pattern sometimes of kind of like justifying to the other parent why we're doing what we're doing.
Right.
And I think that the last point that I want to get to after this, I think the other mistake is people trying to document their case through the communication. So I want to dig into that too, because I think that is a big piece of the court thing. But we always tell mom or dad, one of the things, when you do these communications, you want to be brief, you want to be short, you want to be non-emotional, you want to only respond to things that are like a specific question or a specific logistical issue around the child, or something that you really need to answer. When are you going to step up to the plate and act like a real dad? That's not a question that you respond to.
Right.
That's a question that you let go.
Right.
And it's hard to not defend yourself against those attacks.
Yeah, and there's another reason too, quite apart from the court. The court is going to see somebody who is reactive and shares too much of their feelings, particularly about the other side, and does those things. Sure, that's going to get you the black hat if you engage in that. But there's also the factor of building trust between co-parents, and I think people miss the value of that.
I do think people miss the value of that. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it's a good point. I find most of the time that the state of mind that people are in, that honestly, you can't even talk to them about that.
Right.
In the very beginning, I can't even, for a lot of times the first year or two, a long time, it takes a long time for these emotions to die down. But I find most people think there is no hope of building trust with their co-parent.
Right.
And it takes a long time, and it takes a very specific, intentional approach.
Right.
But Thomas and I have seen that happen in hundreds and hundreds of cases. And when you eventually get to the point where you hit that, it's life-changing.
Yeah. And the problem is, it's so hard to lay down your arms.
Yeah.
It's hard to lay down your weapons. because you lived with this person and had an intimate relationship, you know how to hurt them.
Yes.
And they know how to hurt you.
Yes.
And so frequently this becomes a continuation of the fighting that was during the marriage.
Right.
Or even if it doesn't, it's, you're dealing with somebody who knows your weakness.
Right.
So it's hard to lay down your weapon. It's, there's a number of reasons why you want to fight back. You feel like, oh my goodness, I got to fight back.
Right.
And here's the problem with fighting back is that if that relationship is breaking down and there's a custody dispute, the court's generally going to side with the person who lays down their arms.
Right.
The court's going to like that. They're going to like the person
that's trying for peace.
That's trying for peace, that's trying for problem solving. I've seen this over and over again. You see a lot of cases when you're waiting to be heard.
Yeah.
And a very typical scenario is a couple that has a custody evaluation or minors counsel or something of that nature, some third party that's had to intervene.
Right.
Because these two can't shield their child from their conflict, from their negativity.
Right. A parenting coordinator.
Right.
We see all kinds of roles in that.
And my thought is always the same when I see that playing out in court. I think, the person that stops doing this is going to win.
Right. Right. And we've seen that. We've seen that over and over when people are able to shift it. And it's weird because you can gain the trust of the other person.
Right.
Again, it takes time. And I think you have to be careful because there is a way to approach it without exposing your own self. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you just, lay yourself open wide for attack on your communications. It's way more gradual than that. It's a much more gradual approach. But what will happen? I did this with Thomas's ex-wife. So, and sometimes it's, the co-parents, sometimes it's a step parent. Right. It's whatever, whoever the two people are that can like figure it out and figure out how to make this work. But in the very beginning, Thomas and his ex-wife had zero trust. To the point where they didn't even speak to each other. They didn't talk. Everything went through email. Yeah. And kids were exchanged at daycare, like no face-to-face, no nothing.
Right. If I know anything about her, gaining her trust, she's not a trusting person.
Right.
Generally, she's hypervigilant, and she's looking for ways that she can be attacked so she can protect herself. And
right.
I think if she were sitting here, she would agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And she's she's been through a lot of things in life that have caused her to develop those coping mechanisms.
The defense. Yeah, she's defensive.
Right. And so this took a really long time, and it was really very methodical on our part. But we didn't totally lay down our shields. We didn't want to expose our underbelly, right? But we also continually sent the message to her that, hey, we're here to help you. We're here to pick up slack. We're here to, do what needs to be done for the kids. We're here to, and over time of repeating that over and over and over and over, for probably 2 to 3 years, I would say it took from the time that we really got intentional and knew what we needed to do. It took that long to really break through and start to have the type of trust where you're not worried. Like now we're to the point where one of us goes out of town and we give the other one the house key so that we can check on each other's pets and do our, like, that we're the person, and so and
we're the go-to person. She even picked me up at the beach one time when I locked my keys in the car.
Yeah. So, but we weren't even called. They couldn't even speak in the very beginning. Like they didn't even see each other for exchanges. So that took a really long time. And I'm not saying that you ever hit quite that level of trust. With my ex-husband, it's been a little more challenging.
Because we're professionals.
But I am to the point to where my world is not intruded on by him. I have a strong enough boundary where whatever happens, it's in his world, it's between him and the kids, and I'm not really affected by that. And I think in the beginning, a lot of times, it's hard not to be emotionally impacted by what the other person is doing. It seems like they have this constant ability to just make you crazy and turn your world upside down.
Well, I knew, getting back to, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Getting back to my ex, there's a sense that you have to be careful with her. And I know that any misstep in my communication could have destroyed that relationship.
Right.
It's very easy to destroy trust. It's very hard to build it, and it's very easy to destroy it.
Right. And that's why you and I were very, very careful with our communication with her.
Right.
Like, you would write it. You and I would go over it a day later. We would analyze every word. We would, it's learning how to do this has taken about, I always tell people I've been doing this 15 years because I'll give somebody the verbiage for something and they'll go, wow, that's really good. Well, yeah, you do this all day, every day for 15 years. You'll get really good at it too.
Right.
So
Tammy is really good at coaching this. I have my men's group. I have her come in sometimes because her group meets a half an hour after my group does. And some of the things she says about the communication is priceless. And she's helped me in this way and to build that trust with my ex.
Yeah, and I think it helps that where Thomas works with the guys and I work with women primarily, then you kind of get both, you see both sides of the coin, and you can sort of help one understand the other and what works and what doesn't. It's like when the guys start being formal or start doing those things, I'm like, no, your ex-wife's not going to respond well to that.
And I miss that because I'm formal.
You are kind of formal.
I tend to speak that way. Even to friends, I speak formally.
Yeah, you do. But you don't do that with me, though.
No.
See, so if you and I broke up and then you're sending me these big formal communications, I'd probably be like,
yeah, Mr. Attorney.
Mr. Attorney, turn it off.
Time to turn it off.
And then, like I said before, the other thing that we really see people do is the documentation. And you mentioned this. You said, if I don't respond to this, it must be true.
Yeah.
And this is how people look at it. So if we're being attacked by the other person for something that isn't true, then how are we going to prove that it's not true if we don't say anything?
Right. Well, if you don't say anything, if you don't say in the communication, well, yes, I agree, then you haven't agreed with it. Yeah.
I think people worry, is the court going to see it that way?
No, I don't think so. Not usually.
So the court's going to think it is true if I don't respond to it?
No, the opposite.
Yeah.
Reverse that.
So yes, the court does usually see it the way you see it.
That's what I mean. What I mean is, if you have a long list of criticisms and the other parent ignores those things, I mean, if a person's concerned that you're not changing the diapers often enough, I'll give one example that we see sometimes.
Yeah.
It's probably a good idea to respond, hey, I understand that. I'll be more vigilant next time.
Really? I wouldn't respond to that.
No?
No, because here's what happens. Okay, I diaper the baby. I go get in the car. I go meet Dad. I exchange the baby. Dad gets the baby home, and then Dad sends me a note about how he's got a dirty diaper. Well, no doubt. It's only been an hour and a half since I changed his diaper, and I fed him right before he went out the door. So, yeah, he probably does have a dirty diaper.
No, but you can address that in a way that's not combative.
Yes, I agree.
Rather than taking offense.
No, I agree that you shouldn't take offense, but I also don't think that you have to respond and say, "I'll be more vigilant," as if you weren't being vigilant.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that is some kind of.
Well, how about this?
Here, we're going to have live a communication correction right in the middle of the podcast episode.
Yeah, I understand your concern. Is that an admission?
I don't know. I don't know. I would probably say something like, Or
how about mind your own business?
Screw you. That's what I really want to say. No, but I would probably say something along the lines of, I changed him about an hour and a half ago, so it probably happened during the transition.
Yeah.
So it's, or I might just say received, or I might say nothing at all. Part of it depends on how many times have you gotten this message. Now, is this a constant attack of dads? If there's a certain point at which, and I guess I shouldn't assume it's dad, it could be mom, whatever, but there's a certain point at which when the person just is like a broken record over, oh, there's a dirty diaper at the end of every transition, eventually I just start to ignore it. Like, I'm not going to, the first time I might say, thanks for letting me know, probably happened in transition, and then if somebody comes back with it again.
Well, let's say, though, that there's some legitimate concern.
Okay, but whose legitimate concern, his or her?
Well, let's say it doesn't matter whose. Let's say the concern that's expressed by the other parent is related to timeliness, and they go on this
related to what?
Timeliness.
Okay.
And you get this message. Oh, you were late on Tuesday. You were late again on Wednesday. You were late again on Thursday. Can't you be on time? Can't you just, why don't you get yourself a watch so you can, kind of communication. On the one hand, ignoring it may be the best policy, but it may be better to just say, hey, I know I've run late the last few times.
Well, and this goes back to the coaching on it, right? Because it depends on the circumstance. And this is what I always tell people, like, I can tell you, okay, be kind, be brief, do all these things. But really what happens is, especially when you're dealing with a high conflict parent on the other side, it depends. It depends on how many times you've gotten that communication, how it's coming across. It depends on how that person reacts to certain things. Because I'll find that I can be working with two different moms with, obviously that have two different dads that they're dealing with. And I can say the same thing on one thing and it'll go fine. And on the other one, it'll cause an explosion. Right. So you have to know who you're dealing with. And this is part of what I say in the coaching is like, I have to get to know your ex sort of through helping you with the communication. Right. And so if it was an issue like timeliness for the things, for the transitions, and I'm the one struggling with being on time, then I probably wouldn't get defensive if I have in fact been late. What people will tend to do is say something like, well, I've only been late twice and you're the one that's home all day with the kids. So you need to just wait for me. Yeah. Suck it up or whatever.
Stop being such a Nazi,
Yeah. But what I might say in that instance is, look, my work schedule can be unpredictable. Unfortunately, I've had meetings. I will try to be better at notifying you as soon as I know, and so that we can maybe shift the transition time. Yeah. Or do you have any other suggestions?
Because I think that too much of received, in short, can be perceived by the court and by the other party as stonewalling.
Well, it can, unless you're being attacked for like the 13th time about the same issue. Then I think that's the only way you can shut that down. But I find most of the time, if you say received on some sort of like garbage issue like that, after a couple times, the other person will quit.
Right. And if you're being accused of something that you deny,
right?
Like the child says that you're hitting them. You can document the truth by keeping a separate journal.
And that's usually what I advise people to do, is keep a separate journal. Because what happens when you go in and you're trying to document in your communication, whether that's email or an app, what happens is it throws fire on your co-parenting relationship. Yeah. Because then you start giving all your justification and then they become defensive and your co-parenting relationship actually plummets.
Yeah. And also too much defensiveness can appear like an admission. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In other words, we think the name protest is too much.
Right.
To paraphrase Shakespeare, I think.
Right. So if you go over and you're documenting in a separate log, what I always say to people is that's the same proof as if you documented it in the app. You're just not doing it in the app where the other parent can get defensive about it or respond to it and cause a whole nother, typically what happens is we have a whole nother round of communication, right? Because they don't agree with you. And then they give their opinion, and then you don't agree, and then you give your opinion. And we just keep on this hamster wheel of communication back and forth over all the different things that we don't agree about.
Right. And getting back to the timeliness question,
right?
That if you have a separate log where you document the time that you arrive at the exchange spot or whatever, the time that you transition the children, so you have a record, but you don't have to respond to, why are you always late?
Right. Right. And the diaper issue, I mean, again, when we're talking about that particular issue, if the issue is, well, the doctor has said that, the diaper rash that the baby has is really bad. They gave me this ointment to put on it, and they said to make sure the baby isn't wet or dirty at all, and I got the baby, and after transition, the baby's dirty. Then if I'm the other parent, what I would probably say is, I understand. I will make sure I'm diligent and use the ointment and keep the baby dry and clean. It probably just happened during transition.
Yeah.
And so I might give a little bit, especially like if it's an initial thing, or it's a new discussion, or, the baby is having a severe problem like the diaper rash or whatever. But, if you're a parent of a baby, then I hope you're not just unilaterally saying, oh, the baby's dirty. Like, who knows when that happened? That could have happened anytime, And so again, a lot of things depend on, like, how often are you getting these communications? Are they personally attacking you? Or are they focused on concerns about the child? If it's a focused concern about the child, you don't want to be defensive. But if it's attack on your parenting, then I think you also don't always have to justify that.
Right. Right, and I think that these communications, people think that they're not that important, but they are.
Yeah.
Because I've seen cases turn on me.
Right.
And number one, I have seen at least one case that I can remember very clearly where a change in this case, a father's communication style turned the whole case around.
Yeah, he was our client.
Because he was able to establish trust.
Right.
So we were able to bypass the court, which wasn't doing him any favors, frankly.
Right.
And we were able to, because at the end of the day, mom's busy too, and having these kids running around making demands is exhausting.
Right. And then you had the other case several years ago, which that one also happened to be a dad. I mean, we have cases on both sides, but that one also happened to be a dad. And what we did on his is I really just coached him on stopping attacking.
Yeah.
Stopping attacking. And he actually got 100% change of custody too. Custody was full with mom and it became full with dad, because a lot of times what happens is you're attacking or you're throwing up such a response or so much emotion around it that it's almost like a smoke screen where the court can't actually see what the problematic parent is doing.
Right, because a lot of times they are trying to get to the bottom of what's causing this conflict.
Right, and the focus is on you because you're so
Right.
you're metaphorically screaming.
Yeah.
And so what happens is, in this particular case, like I said, it was actually dad that was over emotional, and he was rude. Is a lot of his problem is he was communicating rudely. Rudely to mom, rudely to experts, rudely to the court, rudely to minors counsel.
He was rude to his ex-wife, are you sure?
He was rude to everybody, not just her.
Yeah.
And
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah,
now.
she was really, she had a lot of issues. There's really a lot of problematic stuff going on with mom. But the court really couldn't even see it because dad came in and he was so much of a bull in a china shop and he was so rude that's all anybody saw, and they weren't really paying attention to her. And once I got him to calm down.
Yeah, it was his style, though. He really, once you get to know this guy, he's a nice guy.
Yeah. He wasn't, I didn't dislike him. It's just that his
a good father.
Yes, and he cared about the kid, but his presentation to the court was so gruff that he couldn't get anywhere in his case.
Yeah, right.
And he was self-represented when we first met him. So he had dug a bit of a hole for himself.
Right. So these are things that professionals will see. They're things that custody evaluators will see. Sometimes the parent coordinators and the therapists will see these communications. And I think we've talked in different episodes about winning in therapy, which is something I've talked about before. And really a lot of success in family court involves getting on the good side and wearing the white hat in front of those people that make decisions.
Right, because what this communication really does at the end of the day is it impacts your credibility, and it either impacts your credibility negatively or positively. And if you have positive credibility with the court, then the other things you're saying are going to be believed and found credible. And if you don't have credibility with the court, the other things you say are not going to be believed or found credible. And so that's why these communications, while they seem almost like an afterthought, they really can strike to the core of your case and greatly impact your ability to get the outcome that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's true. And I've seen that happen.
Yeah, me too, in a lot of cases. So if you have no idea where to start with your communication, you can go to Divorce University online, go to our VIP coaching, and you can book a initial strategy session, our free consultation with either me or Thomas, your choice. We don't have a preference. Whoever you like is fine with us.
She usually does the women.
I usually do women, but I also have a couple male clients, and I don't think you have any female clients. So ladies, you sign up with me.
Well,
men, it's your choice.
I represent women.
I know. I'm just kidding.
A lot of my litigation cases, I represent women.
Right. I understand. It was just a joke.
But I send them to you for the coaching.
Yeah. So anyway, if you are listening to the podcast, please don't forget to rate and review us, and also subscribe wherever you're listening, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, whatever app you're using. If you are watching the video highlights on YouTube, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you get notified as new videos come out each week. If you are watching the video and you want to listen to the full episode, again, head over to divorceuniversityonline.com and you'll be able to listen to the full episode.
They're great to fall asleep by.
I don't know about that. If we laugh all of a sudden, we'll scare you and wake you up. All right. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
See you then.
Thank you for listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your hosts, Thomas and Tammy Ferreira. For more information, visit www.divorceuniversityonline.com.